Hi, my name is David Hutchens, and today I'm going to show you a simple exercise in storytelling called the visual timeline. And this is a great exercise for capturing a story of something that has happened in the past and doing it visually so it becomes really intuitive, and it's really simple to do, and you can do this exercise in a matter of minutes. As you can see, the result of this exercise is indeed visual. You end up with a picture at the end of this that is filled with simple images and icons and stick figures, and you can see going through the middle of the image is that distinguishing characteristic of the visual timeline, which is that squiggly line that moves through the image. And in a minute, I'll show you what all of this means, and you're going to find out that these simple images communicate a great deal. This is loaded with information that is valuable to you and the team. And that is an important point about leadership storytelling and organizational storytelling, because in organizations, the reason we tell stories is not because it's fun or because it feels good, although those things might be true, but the reason we do it is so that we can draw something valuable out of the story. We can draw some meaning or some learning or some knowledge. The reason we tell stories in organizations is so that we can advance the work and so that we can align people and bring the organization together. And this exercise is a really elegant way of doing just that. In this exercise, you'll be telling a story. And so the question is, which story do we tell? Well, that's really up to you as a leader. It's any event in the past that you want to reflect upon, or you want your team to reflect upon and say, what do we now know because of that? What knowledge or learning can we draw from that experience, from that story of something that has already happened? The visual timeline can get you there. So let's jump right in, and I'm going to show you how to do this. All right, here's how this exercise works. To conduct this, all you'll need is some flip chart paper, some markers, and then some tape. So bring your team together, announce the theme of the story that you'll all be working on, and maybe that is, the last project that you worked on together. Maybe that is the history of your team. Maybe it's your individual journey of leadership. So you get to announce what's the story that we're all going to render individually on our timeline. So once you announce that, step 2 is to draw the line. This is the timeline. This is what's going to mark the passing of time in the image. So you want this to be towards the bottom of the flip chart page. Mark the end of the story on your timeline. And maybe that's today. Maybe the story ended 3 months ago. That's up to your team member, because it's their story. They get to decide when the story begins and ends. Now let's move to the beginning of the timeline. When does the story begin? And again, that is the storyteller's choice. Maybe it began last year, maybe it began 15 years ago. Leave it open to their creativity and the way they want to tell their story. And then along the way, what are some milestones that happen in between? So already we're starting to reconstruct the story and the history in our minds a little bit. Now's the fun part, part 3. It's time to draw the line. So for this to work, tell participants, tell your team members, don't plan in advance what they want the line to look like. Let your hand lead. So put the marker to paper and begin reflecting all the way back at the beginning of that story. What happened first? And good events are up, and bad events are down. So this is an emotional history. This is filtered through emotion, good stuff and bad stuff. So when I think back to the beginning of the story, the participant might say, well, I remember our project started off really good, and we were in a really good place, and then a few months after that, there were those negative events that happened, and things got really difficult. And maybe there were a series of setbacks and small advances and then more setbacks. And it was really hard there for a while. And so continue drawing the line as you reconstruct the memory in your head. So in a way, the line emerges with its own identity, almost its own intelligence, as you think through the history. So this is relatively fast and intuitive, and again, let your hand lead. It's really easy to do. You'll be surprised how quickly the line emerges. So now we have this line, which in its own way tells a story. It's relatively abstract to anybody else, but to the person who just drew this, it's loaded with meaning and emotion and memory. So this is really a valuable knowledge artifact at this point. But we want to bring it to life even more. So let's return to our line, and now we're going to add some images and icons and stick figures to all of the different inflection points and movements and significant events along the timeline. And this does a couple things. One, it brings the storyteller deeper into their story, so they're thinking even more about what happened and they're starting to draw some meaning out of the story. And two, it brings the timeline to life for other people. And so now it's really becoming a pretty robust presentation. But we're still not done. Because remember, the reason we're telling stories at all is so that we can draw some value and some meaning and some knowledge out of them. And so now we're going to do that explicitly with the visual timeline. So one more time, let's go back to our image. And now along the bottom, as we look at each of those main movements along the story, ask yourself, what did we learn? What's the knowledge or the takeaway associated with each of those parts of the story? And this part of the exercise is difficult because people often aren't used to thinking that way. They're not used to scouring their histories and saying, what did I draw from that? What did that mean? And yet, that's exactly the discipline that we want to be developing as leaders. And so this becomes really the most important part of the activity, is drawing out that meaning along the timeline. This leads us to the final step, and this is the easiest part, and that is simply take turns sharing your timelines with one another. The room will come to life with energy as people start explaining what they drew, why they drew it, and most importantly, what does that tell us about our journey together? What knowledge and value can we draw out of our experiences? And this becomes an enormously valuable thing to do in organizations. And it's the source of your leadership. Thank you again for spending some time with me today. Come back. We do have some other knowledge learning objects around storytelling, and I look forward to exploring this some more with you. You can learn more about these ideas and much, much more from my new book, Circle of the Nine Muses, available now from Wiley & Sons.